So today I'm joined by Bryn Law. Bryn, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks.
Good. Obviously, me and you have met before a while ago, back at Cardiff here at uni. But for everyone else, do you reckon you just give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah. So I'm lots of things. Brief introduction. I've been a sports broadcaster for 30 something years and worked at BBC and Sky Sports. And now I'm a freelance, but I also do lots of other things. I'm a media trainer. I'm a lecturer these days as well, which is where you and I met. And I kind of advise people on some media stuff as well. So there's quite a lot going on, to be honest with you. But
Yeah,
that's in a nutshell. That's it.
yeah, that's a really good summary, actually, Bryn. So we're just going to start kind of the background and your kind of start into the media. So I've got here you started out at a place called Marcher Sounds. Was that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the if you want to go further back than that, in terms of
Yeah, go for it.
the journey started with me deciding at a very young age that I wanted to be a football commentator, and I mean, like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And then from that point onwards, having kind of made that decision, not very good at football, love football, better talk about football than try and play football. From that point onwards, I then sort of set about trying to work out how the best way to do that thing that I wanted to do was. So when I got a bit older, I started asking people what they thought the best route was, and people said, "Oh, you need to kind of get into journalism." And so I went and talked to the guy from the local newspaper. Was born in Liverpool, but moved to Wrexham. And I was in Wrexham by now. And I went along and watched a game sitting alongside him. And then he got me to write a match report. And then he sort of critiqued the match report. And then I was working on a talking newspaper for the blind at school. So I'd go in every Friday and I would put together the sports section of that talking newspaper. So that was a community service that I was involved in. And then I got involved with the hospital radio football commentaries at Wrexham. So that was at age 16. So I was actually commentating on games at the age of 16. And so all the things that I felt I needed to do to put in place to then eventually become a football commentator, I was doing. And then I went to do a university course. I was very interested in drama, but I could see that as a means to an end because there's drama in sport, and particularly in the way that you broadcast sport. So I did quite a lot with a sort of a fairly good level with drama, and then I went off to do an English and drama degree course, and that then before I'd finished that, I'd applied for a broadcast journalism course. In those days, there were no 3-year degree courses in any kind of media, really. So you did your degree, and then you went at the end of it to a postgrad course. There were a few of those, about 4 of those in the country. So places on them were quite highly sought after. And there weren't, I think, of those journalism courses, there were probably only 2 or 3 at most broadcast journalism courses. And I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, not a newspaper journalist, because I wanted to be a commentator. So I got on one of those courses at Preston and went and did a year doing that. As part of that, we had a long placement, which was with Marcher Sound, which brings me to your earlier question. And so I went into there for 2 or 3 weeks on work placement, and I worked as a news journalist because it was a broadcast journalist course, not a sports journalism course. And at the end of the placement, they said, actually, we might have a bit more if you want to carry on. They knew I was interested in football. They'd sent me out to do 1 or 2 football stories while I was there. And off the back of that, they said, well, we've got some opportunities to report on games if you're interested. So obviously I was. And when I finished the course, say June, I started to go and do freelance journalist shifts at Marcher Sound. And at the same time as I was doing the news shifts, they also offered me some games to cover. So I was going along not as a commentator, but as a match reporter. So I was putting there were short inserts into the Saturday afternoon sports show. They had somebody else doing the commentaries. And then that led up to a point in November of 1991, would it have been, when they said FA Cup first round weekend. The radio station Marcher Sound was based in Wrexham, but it covered Wrexham and Chester and the Wirral as its 3 areas that it broadcast to. So in that, there was the Wrexham club, there was the Chester club, and there was Tranmere Rovers. So the first round of the FA Cup, they said, what we're going to do this weekend, we're going to send a reporter to each of those games, And at half time, depending on which looks like the best cup tie, we'll decide which second half commentary we're going to do. So I was dispatched to do Wrexham v Winsford United at the racecourse, a dream come true. My team, I've supported Wrexham all my life, and I'd already been there and worked as a commentator for Hospital Radio in years gone by. So here I was, but now for a real radio station. And at halftime, they picked my game. So that was November, having left Preston in June, July. And I was actually doing my first proper commentary on the radio. So the thing that I'd set out to do from very early on in life, I actually attained or achieved ridiculously quickly. That's not the end of the journey by any stretch of the imagination, but I got there. I carried on working as a freelance for Marches Sound. I had another commentary to do at the next round of the FA Cup when Wrexham played Telford. I did that one as well. And then we got to a position in around about January time, no, a bit earlier than that, December time, where I actually got offered another role somewhere else, which was more permanent than just the occasional freelance shift. In Barrow-in-Furness, working for BBC Radio Cumbria, purely as a news reporter. So on the basis of the fact it'd be good experience and it was a regular paying gig, I went and I took that opportunity and went off to work there for 6 months. Whilst I was there, I was still carrying on doing match coverage for Marches Sound. I was a bit dubious about doing it because I was working now for the BBC, so I did it under an assumed name. I did the match coverage in somebody else's name. So nobody cottoned on. I'm sure nobody would have been too bothered anyway, but no cottoned onto it. And then when I finished in Barrow at the end of 6 months, I went back and carried on freelancing at Marcher. And at that point, they actually offered me a job. But basically on the same day that they offered me a job, BBC Radio Leeds also offered me a job.
Wow, okay.
And the job in Leeds was on considerably more money than Marches Sound were offering me. So I went off to do the job at Radio Leeds. End of chapter 1.
Wow, yeah, that's some start to your career. It's funny you mentioned at the start there actually about how, football wasn't working out, so you went into the media side. Like I've had a chat with a few people now, that kind of seems to be the storyline of not being ability wise, not being good enough to go into the other side of it.
Yeah, well, it was, even I spent my first 8-9 years in Liverpool, which was an absolute soccer mad city.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, even probably more so than it is now, because Liverpool I was there when Liverpool won the European Cup for the first time and then the second time, and so Liverpool were arguably the best side in the world at that point. Everton were a bit like now, a bit of a shadow force, but there was huge interest in football with everybody in the city. So I was playing in the street every day, every night from a really young age, every sort of dinner time, playtime at school, played for the school team as well. But I was playing with people I could already recognize were better than me.
Yeah.
And so it was apparent to me that, that they were always going to be better than me. So it wasn't a path that I pursued particularly exhaustively. It was one where I think I was cute enough to work out from a very early age that the playing thing wasn't going to be for me. But what I actually loved, and the thing that still resonates as a starting point, was what I used to love doing was listening to those Liverpool games that I've just mentioned, the European Cup ties. I used to love listening to them on a little radio, like a bedside radio. So I'd go to bed because it was school the next day, and there'd be a midweek game. Liverpool might be playing against Benfica in the Stadium of Light, and I would go to bed and lights would be off, but I'd have the little radio underneath the bed covers, and I'd be listening to a radio commentary. And I distinctly remember there was the Radio 2, as it was then, commentary team of Alan Parry and Peter Jones. And I used to love listening to them. They were brilliant. Peter Jones was a fantastic Welsh commentator. Alan Parry was a Scouser. And then I listened to a guy called Clive Tilsley on Radio City, which was the commercial radio station in Liverpool. And Clive Tilsley was doing all the European games as well. And I used to love that, how they took me to the place just through the words that they used. And that was the thing. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted that same opportunity to share the experience with a listener, a person who couldn't see what was going on there. So that was the motivation to go and do that. That's what I wanted to do. And then I ended up many years later, working with Alan Parry. So it was that was incredible. He was one of my broadcasting heroes.
It's a bit of a full circle moment, really, isn't it?
Kinda, yeah, yeah. I probably told you he was a fantastic guy,
Mm.
Alan. I mean, he'd done everything at the highest level. He was working with Sky when I worked with him. But we had lots of nights out because we worked on Wales games together. He was the Wales commentator for a number of years, and I was working as the Wales touchline reporter. So we spent a lot of time in each other's company, and he's a great guy. I probably told him that he was such a big kind of influence on the fact that I was doing this job now. But it was he's a good guy. So that's nice, when you get to meet somebody and they meet your expectations in terms of how they are as well.
Yeah, 100%. Going back to so you said you're on radio. Was it kind of as soon as you were on the radio and doing that first commentary, was that instantly kind of a love for the commentating side of it?
Well, I'd gained that already through the hospital radio stuff because I was doing Wrexham games for hospital radio. Probably did a season's worth of matches after that. I had A levels and then I was off to uni, so it wasn't the longest, but just the opportunity to start doing it gave me a sense that actually I could do it, and that I was okay. That the idea I had in my head was a valid one, that I could do this, that I could have a go at this, because I enjoyed it for a start. And commentating on Wrexham, I was able to kind of separate, because I was already a Wrexham supporter, a fan, so I'd go to games in that capacity, but I was able to compartmentalize. I was able to do it differently. So I wasn't watching the Wrexham games as a fan, I was watching the Wrexham games as a commentator. And so when I went to interview for a job at Radio Leeds a few years later, I took commentary, or they gave me a commentary test when I was there, and I'd already done the couple for March of Sound as well. And so that was for a sports job, and the guy who got the sports job was a guy called Peter Drury, who I'm sure you'll recognise. So Pete was at Radio Leeds already. He was always getting the job, as it turned out, but I went and interviewed for it and did the commentary test, and the commentary test went okay. So what that meant was that they'd identified me as a potential commentator for the future for them. So they didn't have a slot available at that particular time, but they were aware that I was in the running when that big slot became available. And that's what happened basically later, further down the line. They did want a commentator. They knew I could do it. I'd already proven I could do it. And so I was able to step in. But commentary was, my commentary still now is based on those early kind of those early years of the way it made me feel is the way I would like to try and make people feel when they listen to a commentary now.
I think I can. Yeah, I think that obviously I've had very, very little experience with commentary on this course and in my time doing university. But what I kind of have discovered is that all commentators have kind of got their own niche in a way. Everyone's a bit different, and you've kind of got to be a little bit different to everyone else to succeed. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but possibly. I mean, there is a kind of there is sometimes a bit of an identity kit commentary thing that goes on as well. There's a bit of a commentator's voice that we all tend to occasionally lapse into. But I mean, the motivation for all commentators should be the same. The motivation should be that you are there because you love being there. And I loved being there when I was doing it for hospital radio. And I really loved being there when I was doing it for March of Sound for those first couple of occasions. It was like, wow. And I still love it now. And as you and I speak now, I've got another commentary coming up in the next 24 hours. And I still have the same kind of level of excitement about going to do it now as I would have, had then. Probably a bit less nervous now than I was then.
Yeah.
Because I've had a bit more of a go at it since then. But the kind of sense of anticipation around it and the desire to get into it and get started and just let's see what happens. That's the same, and that's the motivation that all commentators should have. That they should be kind of each event is special, and you have to carry at the back of your head that you're really lucky that somebody's paying you to be there to watch this thing on everybody's behalf. And so I still have that sense. I think now I still pay to go and watch football as a fan, and so I still know what that side of the experience is like. Some commentators can, I think, become commentators more than they are fans of the game, and I don't think I'm that. I'm not that. I still go and I watch as a fan. I don't watch it as any kind of expert. But the motivation is the enthusiasm, the passion, and the excitement.
So that's what I kind of want to touch on a little bit, actually. What is the difference of kind of going to watching a game as a fan and as a commentator? Is there, when you're commentating, is it the same passion? Is it the same kind of excitement, or is it a bit different?
It is different. I mean, you can't swear for a start.
That's very true.
And that's a fundamental difference, actually. I'm not saying I'm effing and jeffing like a trooper when I'm watching the game as a fan. I'm not, but I do. In moments of high excitement, I might, and because that's the response that the game can provoke in people. But as a commentator, I obviously definitely can't do that. And so that is a big difference, is that what you're doing is you are tempering your response to the thing that you're watching. You're filtering it. And so there are different types of commentary. And when I started, this was less the case than it is now. But when I was doing a Wrexham game for Marchessound, those FA Cup ties, they would expect me to be, Marchessound was a Wrexham-based radio station, so they would expect me to be Wrexham heavy in terms of I think the tone of the commentary. And so that worked easily for me, because I'd done Hotspot Radio, which was exactly the same thing previously. That was looking at this game from a Wrexham perspective primarily, aware of the opposition. And that's another thing as well that is different between a commentator and a fan. Even if you're doing club-based commentary, as I do now with Leeds United, you're still aware of the opposition as being the equals of the team that you're focusing on, so that you aren't kind of, you're not deriding them, you're not dismissive of them. You know the names of their players in the same way that you know the names of the players in the team that you're looking at, because I think that's the professional thing to do. So there is a difference in terms of even the club-based commentary, which is more like the fan experience, because I am watching the game on behalf of all the Leeds United supporters who are tuning into the LUTV coverage, and only Leeds United fans will be tuning into the LUTV coverage. So we know who our audience is, and we do present commentary that is dedicated to them. But there is still a difference between that and me just going, "Come on, Leeds, get in there, get in." There is a difference. So I maintain a professional perspective. I try and maintain it pretty much at all times. Occasionally the mask slips in moments of high drama, but that's okay on LUTV. If I was doing the same game, and I've done lots of commentary from the neutral perspective, then that is a completely different experience to watching as a fan, because both sides have equal merit in terms of the coverage there. The only time you might vary from that is if you were doing international games, which I've done as well, when you have a home nation. So if I've commentated on Wales at senior level, at under 21 level, at 16s. So I was watching Wales against a team from another country, which means that I'm talking mainly about Wales, and I'm watching the game. If I'm high or I'm low, it's from that Welsh perspective still. But most commentators watch most games from a neutral perspective. And that means that they're not invested in the outcome. They don't care who wins, if you like. Yeah. And that's obviously completely different from the fan experience. And that is actually, in a way, harder to do, to keep that interesting. And it's easy for me. I'm allowed to be passionate about Leeds United in our coverage because it's for Leeds fans. If I work for Radio Wales and I'm doing a Wrexham game, I do look at it from pretty much the same perspective, frankly. Not quite the same, maybe just turn it down a little bit because, hey, it's the BBC. But still, I'm thinking, well, it's BBC Radio Wales. These days, it's on the Wrexham FM frequency. So who on earth is going to be listening to this coverage other than Wrexham fans? So do they want to hear, endless tales about the opposition? No, not really. Let's be honest. They want to hear about what Wrexham are doing. So you have to be kind of, I guess the way that you pitch it in terms of how close you are to being a fan is in terms of the audience. So is the audience involved or is the audience neutral? And the expectation with the neutral audience is that it's purely the commentary mirrors that. So you are not fan-like at all. And that means, I mean, there are things like, you don't celebrate in the what used to be called a press box in the media seats. Although, if you're doing an LUTV coverage like we were when Leeds United stayed up on the final day of the Premier League season with a last-minute goal at Brentford, and you've spent all season watching Leeds United home and away, covering them home and away, and this is a hugely significant outcome, then it's very difficult not to find yourself in that position of kind of leaping out the seat because it's big, and that mirrors, your reaction is what the Leeds fans would expect. But there's a line that we tread. I like doing the type of commentary that I do. I like club-based commentary because, as I've already said, I watch football as a fan, and I like the fan experience, and I understand the fan experience because I still go on the train, buy a ticket, do all the things, have a pint beforehand, all those kind of things that a fan would do. I'm not separated from the game. I don't only watch football from the press box. I watch it from behind the goal as well. So I think that's useful in terms of understanding how that bit works. And I think I still remember how the neutral bit works as well.
Yeah, obviously, there's probably going to be times you've got to hold your tongue a little bit. You spoke about the BBC there a little bit. I kind of want to go into that. Was that kind of your first big leap into like the mainstream with that BBC job offer? How was that to kind of go from, local radio to that?
It was BBC Radio Leeds, so I was going to local radio, but it was much bigger.
Yeah,
because this was a big city station. So, and it was a big city station with a big reputation for covering sport. So I mentioned Peter Drury was already working there. A guy called Miles Harrison was also working there at the time. Miles has been top level broadcaster ever since. John Champion had worked there previously. John, is he doing NBC games now? So John's worked in America, but he's worked at the highest level BBC. So there was a really good roster of people who preceded me at BBC Radio Leeds. Dave Woods was there, who's the BBC rugby league commentator. So all these guys that I ended up sort of working with or working around were, all went on to have fantastic careers in broadcasting. So there was a kind of a reputation established at the station. They'd done all the Leeds United games for many, many years. And they set the stall out as being, we're the station, we are the Leeds United station. So again, you had that, bit like what I'm doing now, really. Everything was really heavily Leeds United branded. But before I got to do any football commentaries for them, I had to kind of prove my worth. And so I did, the very first commentary game I did for them, bizarrely, was a Friday night match, Halifax against Wrexham. So here I am, the Wrexham fan. I was going to go to the game. I had tickets for the game to go and watch it as a fan because I lived in Leeds and it was in Halifax, which is close. And then fairly late on, Radio Leeds said, oh, we need a commentator for that game on Friday night. Do you fancy doing it? And I hadn't done a commentary for them up to that point. I'd done some match reports, but I hadn't done a commentary. So I took the opportunity. So I ended up commentating on a Wrexham game. It was my first game for BBC Radio Leeds. And then that went okay. So they then came back and said, actually, we might have a few more commentary opportunities now, but they won't be on a Saturday afternoon by and large. They'll be in midweek. So I ended up doing some Bradford games and some Huddersfield games and some Halifax games. But I was also working on a permanent early at the time because my actual role at that time was a news and sports reporter. And I was working on the breakfast show in that capacity every day, every weekday. So I was in at 5:45, 5:45 every morning. And I was putting together sports bulletins, but I was also reporting on house fires and, the usual news stuff. So it was a role that was 70-30, weighted in favour of news. Obviously, I trained as a news journalist, which wasn't what I wanted, but it was a means to an end because I was in the place that I wanted to be. And they kind of dangled the carrot saying, stick around and there'll be more football to do. So I did just about manage to hang on in there. I was a bit of a grumpy puppy at times, but they kept me interested by giving me these midweek games. But I was doing a midweek game sometimes away, so I might go and do Port Vale v Bradford on a Tuesday night, and then I'd drive back to Leeds afterwards, which is a good 2-hour schlep, and then I'd be in at 5:30 the next morning, so I wouldn't get home till midnight, and then I'd be in 5.5 hours later, which actually in this day and age you're not really supposed to do. But I was prepared to do that because I wanted to do the commentary, and I wanted to prove that I wanted to do the commentary, so that when the day came that the guy, Peter Drury was initially the Leeds United commentator. Leeds had just won the championship, so they were a real big deal. The Premier League, the last time that anybody won a non-Premier League top division was Leeds United in the season prior to me arriving there. So it was a big deal. And when Peter moved on to bigger and better things with national radio, for a short while, my boss, the sports editor at Radio Leeds, took over and did the commentaries. And then he had some health issues, and the gap opened up. And then they said to me, do you want to do Leeds United? So of course I said yes. And at that point, I made the full-time move over to the sports desk then at round about the same time. So then now I was Radio Leeds United commentator. So we were doing all the games. And that's how that began, how that kind of relationship started there. Well, I arrived at BBC Radio Leeds, and I was just working as a news and sports reporter on the breakfast show, and the idea was that I kind of played myself into position for when a sport job became available, that I would make the move across. They knew I could commentate, and then they gave me a few games to cover while I was there, and they already had some really good guys already working there. So I had to wait a while, I had to be patient, I had to bide my time. Did a permanent early shift in at 5:30, 5:45 every morning to do preparation for the breakfast show, and then to go and work as a reporter on the breakfast show, news reporter, but also combine that with reading the sports bulletins, which was a bit of a tricky combination, and usually weighted towards the news coverage rather than the sports coverage. But eventually the opportunities began to come as I was just beginning to get a bit frustrated, and they started to give me I was already covering some matches for them on a Saturday, but only as a reporter. And then they offered me a commentary game on a Friday night game, Halifax v Wrexham, again, my team. I was going to go to the match as a fan, and then I changed my plans, and I went as a commentator instead. So that went okay. So they gave me some more midweek games. So I'd commentate on a midweek match, and then I'd drive back, and then a few hours later I'd be up and into work again for 6 a.m. But I stuck at that for a little while, and then a gap opened up, and I was able to. They asked me if I wanted to be the Leeds United commentator, which was the whole point. So the answer was yes. So then I started doing Leeds United matches on a permanent basis, and at the same time made a permanent move to the sports team as well.
What was it like when you kind of got that first offer from Leeds? Obviously, that's a big gig at that point in your career. What was that kind of like?
Well, it was, I'd already done more than I was expecting to do very, very quickly in the stuff I'd done before. So this felt like the next step on the route. The bit in the middle was Barrow, which was just somewhere I went in a way to get a bit more experience as a news reporter and to earn a few quid as well, because that was a sort of paying more, or there were more shifts. I was working occasional shifts in the previous role at Marcher Sound, and then I was full-time with Radio Cumbria in Barrow, albeit on a short-term contract. So that gave me some extra elements to just put on to add to the bolster of the CV to give me more chance of getting the next role. And then the Leeds thing came along, and Leeds, it was interesting from a broadcasting perspective, because Leeds had just become, as I joined them, Leeds was just becoming the first radio station in the country to become all talk. And it was a precursor. It was run as a kind of trial operation prior to the concept of BBC Radio 5, now 5 Live, being introduced. The boss at Radio Leeds had been to America, and he'd heard all talk radio in America, and he wanted it. He liked the idea, and he wanted to introduce it in the UK. So BBC Radio Leeds became the first station. And when I started my role, I was working on the very first all talk breakfast show on BBC Radio, on BBC local radio. There was no kind of equivalent because everybody was playing music at the time. So it would be a mix of music and news and sort of chat, weather, sport, and all the rest of it. But BBC Radio Leeds became the first pilot station to go all talk. So that's why they wanted somebody who could react to news stories or sports stories working every morning as part of the breakfast team, so that you would be constantly updating. And that's where this rolling news concept that we now, is normal now. That was where that rolling news concept came from. And BBC Radio Leeds was a real pioneer in that. So the BBC looked at how well it worked at BBC Radio Leeds before then deciding to roll it out in other places. So it was a big change because when you weren't playing records, it meant there was a lot more time to fill, because all those records filled 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes of your hour. If you take them out, those 3 minutes have to be filled with something else. And it was talking. So it was about finding guests. It was about being out reacting to stories, ongoing updates, so you wouldn't just do news at the top of the hour. News could appear anywhere through the hour. So now all these things are kind of taken for granted, but at the time it was pretty revolutionary, and everyone was watching to see how the listening figures went with this. Were people going to be turned off by the fact there was no music to listen to now? So Radio Leeds didn't play any music anymore in the daytime. Didn't play any music anymore pretty much through the night either, for a while. Gradually things have shifted back again, because it's actually it's more expensive to do that than it is to occasionally to play some records, because of what I've just described. But we were in the midst of something that was very new, and I was working on something that was very new, and they wanted sport to be at the very forefront of that, because they saw that they could bring an audience for the news talk stuff that came from the sports talk stuff. So the other big thing that was interesting at that time was that we used to do an hour every morning from 9 till 10, which was the news talk hour. And they would have so it was a discussion on one subject. So it was done on the day, effectively. A bit of prep was done, production was done the night before, but they might change the subject on the morning, on the day, so I'd get in there at 6 a.m. and sometimes the producer would say to me, well, news talk was going to be about X, but we've decided because today the big story is Y, we're going to do that instead. And I'd have to then get involved in setting up guests for that, as well as all the other stuff I was doing. But what they would do sometimes on that is they'd have a sport hour. They would talk about sport for an hour, particularly if it was a big Leeds United story. They would talk about Leeds United for an hour. Now, this was unheard of in a sense, because this was just after the breakfast show. Sport lived in the evenings. It didn't live in the daytime in terms of scheduling. But Radio Leeds was the station that kind of plunked it right there in the middle. It could appear anywhere in the day. We would talk about sport in the mid-morning show. We'd talk about it in the afternoons. We'd have sports guests on in the afternoons rather than just exclusively, as everywhere else had done it before, in the evenings. We also did that as well. So there's a lot of sport. We had a lot of stuff to cover. And there was a lot of production work involved in getting people in to not just fill hour slots on the Tuesday evening or Wednesday evening, Friday evening, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, but also contributing to the stuff that the station was doing in general through the course of the day. So that was part of my role initially. And when I was on the sports desk, a bit less so, because now it was much more about producing for the sports team. But there was a great opportunity at Radio Leeds to do lots of stuff, as I've already described. So even when I went to be a commentator, I was still reading sports bulletins when I was not commentating. I was producing sports shows. So I would get given, can you do the next Tuesdays, 7 till 10? There's no game on, so can you set up some guests? I would produce it. I'd create the running order for it. I would present sports shows. One summer, I did all the Saturday afternoon summer sports shows. I would do sometimes a midweek sports show. Then another time I was tasked with producing and presenting a new strand that they wanted to do. They wanted to start the sports coverage earlier on a Saturday afternoon, and I was given the job of filling that extra half an hour. So I had to create something from scratch. So I did that and presented that for a season. So I was getting lots of different experiences as well as the football commentary that I was doing. And that actually has stood me in really good stead ever since, because it means that I'm pretty adaptable and I can kind of take on a host of different roles because they were so ready to give me the chance to do lots of different things. So that's been very helpful. But the commentary was the main thing that I did there.
So that kind of running order and producing side of it, that kind of takes you did a lot of freelance and stuff, reporting, commentating, presenting, this kind of thing. How was that different when you kind of went into that? I believe that was 1992 around your freelancing.
No, that was right at the beginning, 92. That was March's Sound was freelancing. So that was just doing whatever shifts they asked me to do. I was doing news shifts, basically. Occasionally read some bulletins, and that was a standard freelance reporter shift. You know, you arrive at 9 a.m. and you go home at 5 p.m. and you do whatever needs to be done in between the two times. So you don't know what you're going to go in to do, but you'll get sent out. You'll get given you tasks when you arrive in the office, basically. So that would just be covering news stories and then producing clips for bulletins, or wraps or packages. Well, no packages, it was commercial radio, but the standard news reporting stuff, basically.
And how did you find kind of producing compared to commentating? Was commentating always kind of the thing you preferred doing, or like producing and presenting? Was that something you enjoyed as much, or?
I probably didn't quite enjoy it as much, but I did really enjoy it. And particularly producing. I took the task that was given me of creating the half-hour strand, the extra half-hour strand on a Saturday, is still one of the things that I would look back on most fondly of all the stuff I've done, because I think I created something quite good, and the feedback from people who listened to it was good. And we actually did something that a lot of other people picked up on in terms of themes later on. We got celebrity football guests on it, and we talked about football music, like football songs, actual songs that people had recorded. We'd play one of them every week. We talked to other sides' fans rather than talking to managers or players. We ignored that bit. We talked to the fans from the other team. So all those things have kind of have popped up many, many times in many, many forms since then. But I think we did a kind of, there's a phrase they use, zeitgeist. I think we were a little ahead of the zeitgeist in terms of putting that together. So that was something I took a lot of pleasure from. And if a show went well and it fitted together well and we had good guests on it who spoke well, then, you know, you can take a great sense of satisfaction from that. The usefulness of that to me now is that once I'd left Sky many years later, I found myself in the production role again, because now I was producing match streams for initially for clubs in Europe, playing in Europe, Welsh clubs playing in Europe, but then for Wrexham. And what I was able to do was use the experience gained in putting together a running order and all the nuts and bolts that you've got to make sure are in place in terms of production, and my experience of working on lots of outside broadcasts with Sky when I was working with producers, but for producers in that role as a reporter, generally speaking. I was able to bring that and then create running orders and put productions together, put entire productions together when I was then responsible for the way that coverage looked when we were covering games at Wrexham, for instance. So the experience gained at BBC Radio Leeds was invaluable and continues to be now, because it taught me a lot more than just about commentary.
Yeah, and you briefly touched then on Sky. I kind of want to go into Sky Sports. Obviously, this is a massive part of your career. How did the kind of Sky job first come about?
Well, I had been working at Radio Leeds for 6-7 years, and I trained. They had another innovation at that time in the BBC was a thing called bi-media. And it was the concept that you didn't just work on radio or television, you could work on both, which was usually quite easy for the TV people, because a lot of them had already come from radio. That was part of the pathway, usually went from radio into television. But for the radio people who they wanted to be TV people, we needed training. So the BBC in those days, I don't know what it's like now, was very good at doing training courses. And so they sent me away on a fortnight training course to be taught how to be a TV reporter effectively. But there was some presentation on that as well. And so I came back from the course and started doing some work we had BBC Look North, the evening regional programme, working from our office as well as Radio Leeds. So I started doing some stuff for them. I started doing some features for Look North. And so now I was working in television as well as in radio. So I didn't do a great deal, but then I bumped into a guy called Rob McCaffrey, who had moved to Leeds, who was a friend of another guy that I worked with, who's a pal of mine at BBC Radio Leeds, who worked for the BBC, who was a presenter on Look North. He introduced me to this guy who was now at Sky, this Rob McCaffrey guy, and he was in the area to be a reporter for Sky Sports in the kind of northeast. He based himself in Leeds. So I got to know him quite well. And then Sky Sports decided that they were going to launch a new channel, and it was called Sky Sports News. And the guy, Rob, wasn't too keen on working on it. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week was the concept that they were bandying around for this channel. Didn't really, I don't think it really matched his concept of what he wanted to do. So he wanted to be a presenter. So he went down to London to talk about being a presenter. He got that opportunity, but he left a gap behind him for a reporter based in the Northeast. So Sky asked him if he knew anybody, and he mentioned my name. So they asked me to go down and talk to them. So I did, and having had a conversation with them, they offered me the role that it's a new role effectively, because this channel hadn't even started yet. But they offered me the role of being kind of Yorkshire / Northeast correspondent, sports correspondent, for this thing called Sky Sports News. So I accepted that and started working for them even prior to the launch of Sky Sports News. But we were working on it was in existence, but nobody could see it initially. So they were testing it to see how it all fit together, this idea. So I'd worked on the all talk kind of almost rolling news at BBC Radio Leeds when that was introduced. And now here I was a few years later working on the first ever rolling sports news channel, just ahead of launch. And we launched in October, what was it? 98, something like that. And initially, the trial run for it had been relatively successful, I think, so they could see how it all fitted together. And then we went live, and that was the Sky Sports News that you kind of still see now.
I remember when you were here lecturing, you mentioned about the first time you got the Sky Sports coat, and how that was kind of an iconic thing at the time for like new presenters to get that. What was that like?
Yeah, that was, it arrived in this big bundle arrived of stuff, and it wasn't something I immediately took to, because I had this idea coming from the BBC that you wore whatever you bought. You bought your own gear and you wore that. And I actually got in trouble a couple of times on Sky for, even though I had this coat had arrived, the Gant coat. It's called a Gant double decker. It's quite a well-known, very expensive coat. Although it had arrived, there's a couple of times I hadn't worn it to go and do stuff, and I got in trouble. Literally, I got somebody ringing me up and shouting at me, because the whole concept of the Sky Sports News was that they wanted it branded, heavily branded, so that you knew exactly what you were looking at when it was on screen. So everything that you saw on screen told you that this was a Sky Sports product. Sky Sports News was launched to launch a new service, which was the Sky Digital TV service, and so it was an extra channel that people who subscribed to the new service, they got this. So when we launched, almost nobody in the country had it, because nobody had subscribed to Sky Digital. But as word spread about this new channel, so they use sport because that's the one that gets people talking and gets people interested and then gets people subscribing, as they'd already proved with Sky Sports. They used the Sky Sports News channel to drive interest in this new product that they were selling, this new type of Sky delivery. So we were all there with our, the pulling on the big coat was it was almost like having an access all areas pass, even without having an access all areas pass. People, would puff their chest out when they were wearing that coat, and we were expected to be in it on TV every day. And if it was hot, we took the coat off, but we had a Sky Sports branded shirt that we were wearing instead. And We had mic cubes and all the rest of it. Everything told you exactly what you were looking at. And this was, again, it was a new, as far as UK broadcasting was concerned, at least, this was kind of a new concept. You didn't put your name on everything, but now Sky did. It's what they did in the States, I think. A lot of Sky Sports News came from Fox Sport News, which had already launched as a rolling sports news channel. That's what I was shown when I went down there for the interview. So they adopted this new look for the channel. And yes, the paraphernalia, the coats, then they gave us ties with these stripy red and blue ties. All of that became a part of the image of the channel.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, it was such a big thing. It kind of, what we know now is Soccer Saturday. You obviously presented on that for many games. What was kind of your best memories of presenting on that?
Well, Soccer Saturday came about because I wanted still to be a commentator, and I went to work for Sky Sports News as a reporter, not as a commentator. But my idea was that I'll get into Sky Sports, into the kind of into the world of Sky Sports, and then I'll make the move. And I had limited success with that. I did manage to get beyond being a reporter for Sky Sports News, and I did do quite a lot of commentary for them. At one time, I did a lot of commentary for them, but I never made the move completely from being a reporter. The first call on my time was always Sky Sports News time, not Sky Sports time, and the two existed in slightly different worlds. But the halfway house, the meeting place between the two, was Soccer Saturday. Soccer Saturday was a bit like commentating, but it was also a bit like reporting. So it combined two elements, and you had to be a competent commentator because occasionally you had to describe things that happened live. So not even they've just happened. It could happen while you were actually talking. So you need to be able to respond to that. So I think the commentary skill set worked well for that, because obviously all of that is completely live. You're making it up as you go along. I really enjoyed the whole experience. You asked me for individual memories. Well, there were lots of good memories of big games that I did that would have exciting outcomes. But the total experience was what I really enjoyed, because I was working on what was recognizably a really, really top quality sports show, not just a football show. You know, the presenter was one of the best, is the best that I've ever worked with, Jeff Stelling. And the guests were really good. The format for the program was a mad format, but it worked so brilliantly well the way it was put together. So the producer, a guy called Ian Condren, did that really, really well. And I just enjoyed being on it because the energy for that show was just, that's what you go into it for. If you like doing live stuff, and I love doing live stuff, it's the adrenaline rush. Well, that was one long adrenaline rush. You know, you might not even be involved in it personally. If you're watching a 0-0 draw, you might only appear once all afternoon. But on the other hand, you might be at a 5-4 game. So you never knew. So there was a fantastic sort of sense of excitement around that. And it was great to be involved in something that was so good. And also that so many people watched, you know, got great viewing figures. That fantastic. So I would do a lot of work on Sky Sports News that a lot of the time people didn't really see, but Soccer Saturday, everybody seemed to watch that.
And is there kind of a specific game that stands out in your mind, thinking, I'm happy I was there presenting and covering that game?
Yeah, there's the best games that I covered for Soccer Saturday were the ones where things went wrong effectively, or things didn't go as you anticipated they were going to go. So there was a game that I covered at Ellen Road when Leeds United were playing right at the end of the season. They were playing Ipswich at home, and they needed to win to have a chance of staying in the Championship. So they'd never been down lower than that before. And they were winning initially, and then Ipswich equalised quite late on. So now they were going to get relegated. Some of the fans got really aerated about this. They came on the pitch, and the game was stopped right close to the end of the match. The players were all taken off the pitch, and it appeared that the game was over. But I had a sense that wasn't what had happened. I had a sense, just an instinct, no more than that, because nobody was telling me. But my instinct was that the game was going to restart, and that the players were going to get brought out again. And I was the person who had to relay all this information, because Soccer Saturday now, all the other games had finished, and still, we didn't know what was happening with this Leeds game. So it was kind of all eyes on me, to the extent that the guy who was the owner of Hull City, who were playing in Cardiff that day, who was a pal of mine, was sending me messages saying what's going on there, because they were waiting for the outcome as well. Because if Leeds didn't win, Hull City stayed up. So they were massively invested in the outcome. So I had a real sense that this is me telling the story now, because Soccer Saturday was the place that everybody came. You might listen to your own radio station for your club's coverage, but for the big picture, everybody came to Soccer Saturday. You know, pubs and all the rest of it, people would stand all afternoon and watch Soccer Saturday. So that sense, the sense of being at the centre of something really quite important, as much as football ever is important, was very much there, because I even knew that the owner of Hull City was waiting for me to tell them whether they'd stayed up or not. And then, sure enough, I was right. I predicted that the players had only been taken off, even though people were saying the game was over. And I think PA, the press agency, actually I think they even reported it as a full-time score. And I said, no, I don't think that. I stuck my neck out. I said, I don't think that's the case. I don't think they're finished here. And sure enough, the players came back out and they played the last, I think it was 180 seconds or something left in the game. They played that, and then Leeds United didn't score. And then I was reporting on this historic relegation that Leeds United had suffered. Leeds had never been down to the third division before. I've lived in Leeds for 30 years, so I know the city well. So I knew how seismic this was. So I was also then the person relaying this, the moment at which the final whistle went and Leeds United were relegated. So that was one of those that stands out in the memory as being in the middle of something where you do feel a bit like it's all eyes on me here.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that obviously everyone's eyes are on Soccer Saturday at the time, and it's still the same now. You know, me and my mates will sit on a Saturday afternoon and just sit there and watch the results coming in. I feel like it's more of a, I feel like it,
somebody who is compelling and engaging, who can keep the energy level going all the way through that to make a success of that. And Jeff was brilliant, because Jeff was, like I mentioned earlier, Jeff is a fan. He's a football fan. He'll go and watch Hartlepool United as a fan. And he loves football as a fan loves football. He had experts in the studio who could do the footballing perspective. He's there as the fan, which has always been my view on the stuff I do. So we get on really well, Jeff and I. And I think because probably we're coming from similar sorts of backgrounds and a similar kind of view. So Jeff was one thing that made it the success it was, because he kept it going. Brilliant sense of humor. Every club felt that they mattered to Jeff Stelling, you know, because he seemed to know about everybody. And he would create these little the little lines that they'll be dancing on the streets of TNS, the little genius things like that made everybody feel involved, whether they were a Premier League club or whether they were in Scottish League 2. He would have knowledge of them, or so it appeared. Obviously, he had somebody in his ear giving him a lot of that stuff. But the way he then passed that on to the viewer was, truly brilliant. So there was that element to it. The other element that really lifted it above being what the BBC do, that final score type show that they do, and also to an extent what BT have done when they've tried to run something similar, is the reporters at the grounds is the other bit that makes it, because now you've got an interactive element with people who are actually at the match. And so the things that are going on around them, as we've seen countless times when Chris Kamara was doing games, the things going on around about them can become part of the story as well. And those reporters, you get the atmosphere of the game because they're there and that you are seeing them there, and you can hear what's happening in the background. Occasionally you can see what's happening in the background, and you get that sense of urgency and excitement from, that we're going now. Where are we going now? Oh, they're going to, wherever. We're going over to the race course. And you think, oh my God, have Wrexham scored, or have my team scored? So you would get drawn in. The pace of the thing was relentless. And we were told that the match updates that we did needed to be really short, and I'd get people shouting in my ear if I was going over 10, 15 seconds, wrap it up, we've got somewhere else to go. So the pace was the thing that drove it, and having places to go and different people to talk to all the time meant that the energy around the show was unique. There was no other show like it. I'm not sure it's the same show now. I don't watch it anymore. But to be a part of it was brilliant.
Yeah, I think Jeff Sten really did. I was going to ask you actually about Jeff Sten as a presenter. Obviously, we got obviously the famous Kamara clip where he was at Portsmouth. I just think that he kind of made that show, as you said. How was your experience with the other presenters on the show that obviously on the panel as well? They obviously bring a lot to the show. How was your experiences working with them?
Well, I think we all felt we were part of a big team. And the people behind the scenes, you've heard Chris Kamara mention in the past on TV when he's been doing updates, Carly. Well, that was Carly Bassett, and Carly Bassett worked in the production. It was part of the production team, key part of the production team, and she was the person in the gallery base who would tell us, "We're coming to you. You know, we're coming to you soon." She was the voice in our ear, if you like, in terms of she was teeing us up for the next report. So, but Carly would also book the reporters in, so we'd speak to her through the course of the week. But then she was there every week. She was always there. She did them, she did them all, kind of thing. So she was as important, Carly, in her role as anybody else was. And I think it was a real team game, and we all felt that we had a significant role to play in it. And there were big hitters there, obviously, but if I see those guys now, I saw Alan McNally at a game recently, he'll always come over and we'll talk about the old days. And so even though I wasn't meeting the guys because I was out on the road every week, I was never in the office, but we all felt we were part of something, and we have that bond on that basis.
Yeah, 100%. And I kind of want to, we'll obviously run out of time a little bit here, but coming from a reporting point of view, I remember again from your time lecturing, you talked about a few harsh environments you were reporting at. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was Istanbul one of them? It was the bad ones. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that was what happened. You see, the commentary is all I ever wanted to do was watch football matches, and somebody paying me to do that. That's it. That's me happy. But in the period that I was at Sky Sports News, I didn't do that most of the time. Most of the time, I reported on stuff. So I didn't necessarily. I rarely worked for Sky Sports News on a Saturday. I worked for Soccer Saturday, different department on a Saturday, but I would work for Sky Sports News Monday to Friday. And so I found myself reporting on stuff in a way that I didn't expect previously. I hadn't done really previously, except when I was a news journalist briefly. So I would cover all sorts of different stories at that time, including at Leeds United, the financial collapse of Leeds after the money ran out in the Premier League and then they got relegated. So I was telling that story regularly because it was my patch. A lot of my clubs went bust, actually. Sheffield Wednesday, lots of clubs had major financial issues. So now I was standing outside a ground day in, day out, talking about things like administration and talking to accountants and administrators, not football people, well, involved with football, but not managers or players. So having to get to know a lot more. And then all of a sudden, there were a couple of things that happened in the midst of it all, which took me as far away from what I thought this job was going to be in terms of I'm here to cover football as I ever could have been. And one of them was in Istanbul when I was out there to cover Galatasaray versus Leeds United in the UEFA Cup semi-final, first leg, away leg. So it was a really big game. And the night before the match, we'd done all the usual stuff that we did on these on the European trips. You'd go and film shots of Istanbul. Here we are in Istanbul, to give people a sense of the place you were at. And you might find a couple of fans to talk to. And we'd done some work on that because Istanbul had this reputation of this welcome to hell, the banners that they'd held up when Manchester United arrived there famously. So we went and found Galatasaray fans to talk to them. They said, "Oh, it's not like that at all. It's don't believe the hype kind of thing. It'll be fine." So we'd done quite a lot of work. We'd put all our stuff together the day before the game, and it had all been sent back to London to be run on the morning of the game. And we went back to the hotel to have some food and a drink, and it was the end of the working day. And we sat down at the bar and ordered food, and a beer arrived. And then the phone went from some of the other guys who were out there covering it for other people who were all staying in the same hotel but had gone into town for a meal. And one of them said to me, "There's been some trouble in town. It doesn't look good." And not long after, I got a call from Sky to say, "We're getting a report that Leeds fans have been stabbed. Can you go and check it out?" So we had to leave the food, leave the beer, head into town. And that's where the story, really developed. Then we discovered that, yes, they had been stabbed and it was serious. And we ended up outside the hospital, and we were outside the hospital when we were told that one of the fans had died. And then we were told a bit later that both of the fans had now died. And the Leeds people were outside the hospital, and we saw Peter Ridsdale there. And this thing now was kind of big. And suddenly I'd gone to cover a football match, and I was covering the murder of two football fans. And the whole of the next day, the day of the game, we were outside the stadium from early in the morning reporting on this. And this was a news story, really. This now, although it was on Sky Sports News, we were doing it. And Keith Graves, who was the Middle East correspondent for Sky News, arrived, and I had to brief him on what had happened. And then you knew that we were at a whole different level here now. And we were outside there all day, and the atmosphere was volatile, to say the least. And then we had to watch the game, and then I was meant to go and do post-match after the game. But, nobody had much appetite for doing any of that sort of stuff by then. And it was the moment at which the Leeds supporters bus arrived at the stadium. We were standing right on the route of the supporters bus on a kind of raised platform doing our lives. We were actually on air as the bus arrived. The buses arrived, and all the Galatasaray fans ran through where we were working live to kind of attack the buses. So we were literally right in the thick of it. And I was doing something that I had never, ever envisaged I'd be doing as a person covering football. But it wasn't the only time. So I got used to the concept that, I was going to do a football job, but I might not end up doing a football job. With Sky Sports News, Sky Sports News helped create a concept that football in particular, but sport in general, was incredibly important, in all of its aspects. So that it wasn't just a thing that happened between, for instance, 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. It was a thing that was existing all week long. And, the fact that a chief executive was leaving was as much importance as a new striker was being signed. And so because Sky Sports News needed people to have that idea, because they wanted you to watch. When I started, the first day I was starting at Sky Sports News, I thought to myself, how is this going to work? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and all you're going to talk about is sport. What the hell are you going to talk about? But that was the success of it, was that they created the concept that there was loads to talk about, because look at this is happening, and this is happening, and this is nothing to do with the game, but this has happened as well. And so others then have followed, and it's created this concept that the industry is incredibly, it's like politics now. It gets the same level of scrutiny, and the same level of status is almost attached to the sports story now as a big political story or a big industrial story. And in actual fact, it's not the same. Listen, the truth is, it's not as important. None of it's as important. It's sport, it's football, it's blokes running around, women running around kicking a bag of air. Yeah, the way that the industry works now, there is this sort of idea that sport is incredibly important, and it has this status that puts it alongside politics or industrial stories or any of the other big tales now. So when I started covering sport never would lead the bulletin. It was always at the end of a bulletin, or it was on the back pages only, never on the front pages. But then from Radio Leeds onwards, the idea that sport actually could appear anywhere, that it was important enough, that its status was sufficient enough, that it could be the main topic of conversation on the breakfast show, for instance, on Radio Leeds, then fed into this idea. You'd had 5 Live appear then as well, but then fed into this idea that Sky Sports News have absolutely built upon that sport is a thing that you can talk about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And to fill all the time that creates, you need to look on sport in general as being this kind of an industry with lots of different personalities and characters involved. So whereas I was used to, in the very old days, go and talk to the manager ahead of a game, and then maybe talk to a player before and after the game. That was it. That was our interaction. Then you'd be going to talk to people Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whether there was a game or not. And if there was no football to talk about, you'd have to find something else to talk about. So if there was a new chief executive coming in, you might go and talk to the new chief executive. If there's an ownership issue, you go and talk to the people who want to buy the club or the people who are selling the club, or you go and talk to the fans. And if there's nobody else to talk to, you go and talk to the tea lady or the kit man. So you were always involved in talking to different people to fill the gaps that are opened up when you want to cover that much sport 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it was a necessity on the part of those people putting together something like Sky Sports News to create the idea that sport was incredibly important, so that people would sit and watch all day and say, "Oh, have you seen that? There's the managing director's resigned at Chelsea. Oh, has he? In the past, nobody cared. Nobody knew who the managing director at Chelsea was, but now it was important." And so that's where I found myself kind of a little bit at odds, because to me it was still all relatively unimportant. It probably was important, but I wanted to go and watch football. Yeah. That's what I wanted to do. That's why I came into the job in the first place. And now I was being asked to talk about loads of things like finance and, personalities and controversy that was not necessarily football related at all. And so it took me in places that I wasn't necessarily massively happy to go. I had to go and talk about other sport. That would naturally. I don't know much about other sport other than football, to be utterly honest with you, but I got away with it by doing the same things I do anyway, which was prepare properly. But I got sent occasionally to go and report on other sports like rugby league and cricket, to name but two, and really didn't like that at all, because I just wasn't invested in it, wasn't interested in it. There are loads of people who love all kinds of sport. I'm not one of them. So if I've been a fraud for the last 30 plus years, then fair enough. But I wanted to watch football matches then, right at the very, very start. And I still want to watch football matches now. And that's about all I want to do, really. So I've been lucky in that most of what I've done has given me the opportunity to do that. But I think everybody has to be aware now that you're quite rare if you can get away with doing that now. By and large, you have to be lots of things. If you're involved in sports broadcasting in general, you have to be across lots of things. You've got to be ready to be multi-skilling, but also you'll be talking about things that, way beyond what's just happened in the game. You've got to be ready to talk about all aspects of it, because people seem to love it.
Yeah, 100%. Bryn, we're going to have to end it there. I'm running out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. It's a really good insight to the industry and your career, so thank you very much for that.
Okay, you're welcome. Good luck with it.
Perfect. Thanks, Bryn. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you very much.